Okay, let's start this hour. The Trump administration is planning to take action against left-wing groups that the president and his allies claim have contributed to political unrest and violence. The moves are expected to include investigations into tax-exempt status of certain liberal groups like the Open Society Foundations and the Ford Foundation. A source tells NBC News that these actions, which come in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, could begin as early as the end of the month. Federal law, however, prohibits the president and vice president from ordering such tax inquiries, and there has been no evidence linking those groups to Kirk's killing. Officials say they believe the suspect acted alone. The Wall Street Journal reports that officials across the administration are working to identify groups suspected of targeting conservatives or causes that conservatives support. That could include looking at attacks on Tesla showrooms earlier this year, as well as people who have retaliated against law enforcement carrying out Trump's deportation campaign. Meanwhile, the president announced last night that he will label Antifa as a major terrorist organization, although current law only allows this designation for foreign groups. Jeffrey, I'll start with you. Where do we begin?
Where do we begin? Well, one of the specific problems here is that Antifa isn't really a group.
Right.
I mean, it's the nature of an anarchic or a foreign group. It's a bunch of people who organize around a set of ideas that they learn from each other and learn from the internet. The whole issue today is that obviously you don't need an organizational structure to do anything. People become radicalized by reading the web, and then they become. We've seen that for years on the Islamist front. I'm not comparing ISIS and Al Qaeda to whatever might be happening on the left. On the larger question of Open Society Foundation, Ford Foundation, I mean, this is just silly. These are organizations that argue liberal arguments in a legal, law-abiding way, and they're part of the marketplace of ideas. And the idea that you would try to link, whether you agree with it or not, whether you would link Ford Foundation's position on X, Y, or Z, on trans rights, for instance, to violence, it's absurd and it's dangerous. And you know, the issue that conservative groups and the Trump administration need to consider is that, you know, if you want to introduce this way of dealing with your enemies, adversaries in American politics, you're going to reap the whirlwind sooner or later, right? I mean, because no political ideology stays on top forever in the American tradition. And so I find it extraordinary. I find it to be an extraordinary power move that is not well thought out and obviously not grounded in American law or, even more important, American tradition.
And of course, George Soros has been a boogeyman for conservatives for decades, a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor now that people at the top of the administration are saying should be put in jail. If the president wants to go down this path, Mike Barnicle, one would expect he would look at groups that supported the actions on January 6th, if you want to talk about political violence, groups that organized around that and committed violence that day, groups that worked to get those felons out of prison. I suspect the president won't go down that road, but that's sort of the equivalency that Jeffrey's talking about here.
You know what we're really talking about here, I would submit, is that this administration has planned quite successfully the idea of throwing a blanket of intimidation across the voices and the movements and like the Ford Foundations of this country, just to intimidate them from going any further with what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're involved with, what their political beliefs are. That's where we are. The Jimmy Kimmel situation is a perfect example of it. What he said was, you know, he could have said something more sensible, and I'm sure in retrospect he would have redrawn or rewritten what he did. But every American household with a television set, that television set comes with an automatic censure thing. It's called a remote control. Right. If you don't like what you're hearing or what you're watching or the person presenting it, you change the channel. Instead, They want to change the philosophy of the country.
We're going to get more on the details of what's going on with Jimmy Kimmel and his show in just a moment. But just one more beat on this. Conservative strategist Karl Rove has a new piece for the Wall Street Journal entitled, "They Didn't Kill Charlie Kirk." He writes in part this: "There's been a disturbing and growing undercurrent in our national conversation and on the internet, a pronounced emphasis on they and them. Charlie would be alive, but for them. They killed him. They are responsible for his death. They must be made to pay." No, Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by them. They didn't pull the trigger. One person did. Apparently, a young man driven by impulse and a terrible hate. Using Charlie's murder to justify retaliation against political rivals is wrong and dangerous. It will further divide and embitter our country. No good thing will come of it. It is also an insult to his memory. Violence has no role in our country's politics, now or ever. Reasoned discourse is essential to our democracy. Charlie Kirk understood that. Let's hope it's a message his eulogists honor. Jonathan Lemire.
Yeah, I think we'll all be watching the Kirk funeral service this Sunday in Arizona. I should note, a similar tone was struck by Utah Governor Spencer Cox, who also seemed to almost be trying to speak to the president in that news conference, saying this wasn't an organized thing, this was the work of one man, and that one man was arrested and in custody at that point. But Jeff, we've heard that the president and his administration have been working on some of this for a while, this idea of trying to crack down on left-wing organizations in their mind, their political foes, the NGOs, and the like, and it seems like they have now seized upon, despite what we just read, this as a pretext to do so.
Right. I mean, that's the classic playbook of authoritarian-minded people. Use an excuse of violence to go after people who have nothing to do with that particular violence. Karl Rove is right. A person with a gun killed Charlie Kirk. Are there bad ideas and good ideas circulating in society? Of course there are. And according to our tradition, our very, very long tradition in America, we argue out these positions together. And by the way, we even argue them on late night television. And sometimes the comedian goes too far, goes the wrong way. And then the next night they say, well, I went the wrong way, or I went too far. And that's the way we deal with it. We're self-correcting. We don't have bullying federal institutions come in and try essentially to censor arguments they don't like. Again, they're gonna reap the whirlwind of that one day. And what I don't understand is that it just goes against every impulse that they've articulated, which is to say, the right had very reasonable critiques of cancel culture. Stop punishing people for life for the dumb things that they say. They have the power. They have the FCC now. And bam, apparently that philosophy is out the window. And the new philosophy is, if you have a little power, use it.
Cancel culture, free speech, weaponization of government, all three at work in this story. Disney-owned ABC pulling Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show off the air indefinitely amid controversy over Kimmel's recent comments about the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk. During his monologue on Monday night, Kimmel spoke about the Republican response to Kirk's killing, saying, quote, "The MAGA gang is desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving," Kimmel said, setting up a clip of President Trump. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr described those remarks yesterday as the sickest conduct possible, adding the FCC could move to revoke ABC affiliate licenses as a punishment. Just a few hours later, the largest owner of ABC-affiliated stations, Nexstar, announced it would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future, citing Kimmel's comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk. Around the same time, Sinclair, which owns and operates 30 ABC stations, announced it also no longer would carry Kimmel's show. A short time after that, a spokesman for ABC said in a statement the late-night program will be preempted indefinitely, but did not explain that decision. President Trump then praised the move on social media, posting in part, "Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done." And to the point, Mika, that Jeffrey was making about Chairman Carr, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, who was named to that position by President Trump last year after rising through the ranks at the agency, has long spoken out against government censorship and for the freedom of speech. In 2019, Carr posted on social media, "Should the government censor speech it doesn't like? Of course not. The FCC does not have a roving mandate to police speech in the name of the public interest." 2021, Carr wrote this: "A newsroom's decision about what stories to cover and how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official." In 2022, Carr posted this: "Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That is why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship." Again, this is the sitting FCC Chairman Brendan Carr. In 2023, he said, quote, "Free speech is the counterweight. It's the check on government control. That is why censorship is the authoritarian's dream."
Wow.
All that from Brendan Carr, but here's what he said in an interview yesterday just before ABC announced it would pull Jimmy Kimmel Live from the air.
You know, when you look at the conduct that has taken place by Jimmy Kimmel, it appears to be some of the sickest conduct possible. Frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, you know, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. A very reasonable, minimal step that can be taken. I mean, obviously, look, there's calls for Kimmel to be fired. I think, you know, you could certainly see a path forward for suspension over this. And again, you know, the FCC is going to have remedies that we could look at.
So, Katty Kay, that is a very, very different Brendan Carr than we heard in all those quotes that were just a year or two ago, for the most part. He talks about market forces. Well, the market force, as Mike pointed out, is viewers changing the channel if they don't like what they hear on the television. And we can fold into this a business deal that was pending. I mentioned Nexstar, this company that's trying to acquire a rival called Tegna for $6.2 billion. That deal expected to close in the second half of next year. Would need help from the FCC to get that deal done, kind of echoing what we saw in the Colbert case.
Yeah, and it was interesting hearing Ben Smith say earlier that the problem for these media companies is that they're so exposed to government contracts that they have very little leverage, and so you're seeing them cave when they come under pressure. It's becoming increasingly clear, isn't it, Mike, that people around President Trump who are now in the White House spent the 4 years that President Trump was out of power thinking, how can we dismantle liberal with a small L institutions that conservatives have had gripes about, sometimes fairly, sometimes not fairly, for a very long time. And we're seeing them do that systematically. And any time there is an opportunity and they feel that public opinion will let them push that much further, it seems they're going to go as far as they can, doesn't it?
You know, Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, they're talents of a certain order. They always have something to say about whatever is going on in the news, and they will say it with regard to what you think or I think. They will do it according to their own tailored taste. But that's not the issue here, I would think, from everything we've been discussing here this morning. It's proof of what's going on is it's so easy to intimidate the top of the house, the corporate top of the house. Especially if you're the chairman of the FCC and you hold control over who gets a license or whose license is revoked or what companies can buy other companies, other media companies, things like that. They have to be very, very careful dealing with the FCC. And the statements of Brendan Carr in the past, I'm sure he has complete amnesia about those statements because he's just doing what the Trump administration wants done.
Wow.